Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Inclusion St. Louis Speaker Series. Our theme is going to focus on communication, language, and more specifically, the words we use, how that affects progress towards a more inclusive St. Louis. But we cannot, especially looking at the images that we've seen on television today, we cannot move forward without just talking about our concerns, like everybody else that works to support refugees and resettlement and immigrants, express our concern and for everything that is happening with the dramatic situation that is taking place in Kabul, Afghanistan. The International Institute and the community of St. Louis has been working towards mobilizing resources to be able to welcome Afghans who supported the war effort for 20 years. They worked alongside the military, and we have been collaborating both locally as well as nationally to prepare this community to welcome these Afghans who have to leave their country as a result of the fact that the war has come to an end. We're therefore very concerned with the developments, but we will continue to do the work that we have been doing to ensure that those who make it here are welcomed into our community and can join us here as friends and neighbors as we continue to try to build a more inclusive society here in St. Louis. I thought we should at least go on record that we, like so many people, express our concern and hope that the federal government would find a way to resolve the crisis and be able to help those whose lives are now in danger. For the many people who make it to this city, usually do so because they are fleeing circumstances that are beyond their control. And we work here to provide refuge for them as well as an opportunity for them to achieve their greatest potentials. With that said, I'm going to turn to our conversation for today, which, as I mentioned at the start, it's about communication, how our language, our choice of words, the forums or mediums on which we communicate, how we communicate, how all of that affects progress towards a more inclusive society. For starters, I generally start this conversation with the question, is an inclusive St. Louis possible? If it is possible, how? If it is not, why? And let me begin with Yemi.
You know, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't actually start out by saying to everyone who speaks Yoruba, Kabo, which means welcome. And that's a very good question. And it's a very good question in light of just the environment that we're in. And I always operate from the perspective of what I would consider radical optimism, but one that is grounded. And so when you pose the question, is it possible? Yes, but it requires a lot of work. And I've seen a modicum of success in different pockets of our region, especially after the quadruple pandemics that we're still going through, where people are making an effort to do so. And something that I hope you'll ask me a little later on in terms of how do we do that? How do we get to that? And so I'll give a teaser right now and say the way in which we get to that of having an inclusive St. Louis is one that's welcoming, and we have colleagues that are already working in this arena, Betsy Cohen, but one that we don't always start out or continue with calling people out when they've done a wrong or when they've made a mistake. And we should think about a different way of doing that. And I'll share that later when we get to that question.
I would turn now to Karen, same question. an inclusive St. Louis possible?
I appreciate Yemi's optimism. I share that. I think the answer depends on who you ask. I think there are some who would feel very much so, and others who are in situations where they are constantly feeling less included and even targeted by those around them. So I think we have to be mindful of that. And part of that is stepping in other people's shoes and trying to understand why they feel that way. That's alluding also to what Yemi said relative to thinking down sort of to the future of intentional steps. But we certainly are having more conversations now than we used to. And there certainly is a higher level of awareness about different ways that different institutions, whether they are workplaces, schools, or community agencies, might take. But I think it's something we have to accept as an ongoing, I kind of call it the long game. But then I have to think, if I use the phrase the long game, is that an idiom that somebody who maybe is not as aware of American idioms, or a baseball fan or a football fan or sports fan, whatever, understands? So I'll just say, I think it takes a level of intentionality and a very structured approach that considers ongoing efforts, and not just the one-off, not just the window dressing, but looking to all the different changes in current events that make us want to change the way we do this kind of work, intentionally creating a sense of belonging and inclusion for folks in the region. Is it possible? Sure. It's a lot of work. I agree with Yemi.
Negus?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and round out the optimism trio here, and then absolutely believe that it is possible. To both of the points that Yemi and Karen made, I think we do have to be intentional. I think for a very long time, folks have been working to make St. Louis more inclusive. The conversation might seem newer to broader audiences, but there's been a lot of groundwork that's been laid in the past. And again, there's a lot more to go. What I would like to see, and where I would think I'd feel a little bit more of that optimism shining through, is folks, kind of branching out into caring about lots of different sectors or lots of different causes. So for a very long time, it's felt very much like, this is something that I'm owning because either it's part of my lived identity or I have experience in this space. And so I feel comfortable trying to move the needle forward on this specific topic. But, to get a truly inclusive St. Louis city, county, the area, then I think we need to have, more mobilization of, I care about this cause and my cause supports your cause, and we can't really do it in these silos. And so that I have seen, in the last at least few years, make a lot more, headway in how do we lift all causes. And I think to Karen's point, there are folks who are, feeling the impact of maybe I'm not ready, or I don't necessarily understand, or what's in it for me, right? So getting folks to come on board and recognize that it's not just, I'm trying to achieve this one type of inclusion for this one type of community, but how are we all working together to make that a little bit more possible?
Well, thank you all for the time. Before we wrap up here, there's never enough time to have these conversations, but I earnestly hope that this conversation doesn't end here, that we continue to have it. On the 28th of August, we're going to be wrapping up our Festival of Nations season with our grand finale at the 9 Mile Garden. Registrations for tickets, free, are open, but we want to be conscious about who is coming so that we can be responsible with everything that is happening with this pandemic. With that, let me turn to Yemi, Karen, and Negus. Thank you very much for being with us today, for sharing your wealth of experience. And I have a conviction that we're going to continue this conversation in several other forums as we strive to build a more inclusive St. Louis.